This is Classic FM.
Is it okay, do you think, to love Wagner's music? I mean, I think it is beautiful, but in a sense it's been tainted to a certain degree, hasn't it, by his anti-Semitic views?
I made a programme on that very subject because it was very close to my heart, being Jewish myself. My mother's Jewish and we lost family to the Holocaust. Now, I think the way I put it many years ago was that if I were to write an article in any magazine or newspaper today decrying the American influence on European culture, the Disneyfication, the Coca-Colification, if you like, of culture, and how it tamped down the original folk, true cultural identity of countries, and it turned it into a pappy mess of infantile and unsubtle and formulaic entertainment. If I wrote such an essay and said that Americans were destroying Europe with this, people would say, yeah, he's got a point there, you know. And in fact, French intellectuals have been writing this for years, and they forced the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade to take account of this, so that on French radio you have to play a certain proportion of French music, and you can't play all American. And if then, 50 years after I died, there arose, exactly 50 years in fact, there arose someone who was so anti-American that 10 years after coming to power, he had rounded up all the Americans in Europe and put them to death, then suddenly the word anti-Americanism would mean something very, very different. And I think it is true that culturally he was very anti-Semitic, no question, and he wrote about it in disgusting and inexcusable ways. But to say that that means he would stand by the gas ovens of Auschwitz clapping his hands, I think is quite different. The Ring, if it means anything, it's about the supremacy of love over power. And fascism, if it means anything, means the supremacy of power over love. Fascism is the worship of power, the exercise of power. So I think also it should be remembered his last work, Parsifal, which he wrote specifically for the Festspielhaus, as they call it, the festival playhouse at Bayreuth. He insisted that the conductor be one Hermann Levi, whose father was a rabbi and was a Jew, and this was his most shimmeringly religious and transcendental of all his works, and he wanted it to be conducted by this conductor. So you have to realise that it's a complicated thing, Wagner's anti-Semitism, and it's certainly not the same as Himmler's or Hitler's at all. And it may be that he gave some legitimization to Hitler, who was able to look back along a line of anti-Semitism. But Hitler never really quoted Wagner at all. He did make at every conference, Nuremberg rallies, he made the officers go and watch a whole performance of the Meistersinger of Nuremberg, and they got rather bored by that. But he actually, I've spoken to survivors of the death camp, the founder of the English Chamber Orchestra, a remarkable woman, Anita Lasker-Wallfisch, who's still alive, and she said she never heard a note of Wagner played in Auschwitz at all. This idea that it was blaring out on speakers.
It's simply not true.
She played the cello in the Kapelle, the band, the Auschwitz band. And she said they didn't have the resources to play Wagner. They were small. Mahler's sister-in-law or cousin was the conductor. It's an extraordinary story in itself. But she said no, there was no. It's more than slightly overstated. And of course, in Britain, we were wise enough not to take sides with composers. Dame Myra Hess played Beethoven and Bach at the National Gallery every day. There's incredibly popular concerts. And the radio continued to play German music. It's understood that music is taken outside. It's way beyond politics of that kind. But the main thing I've been gabbling on, the main thing I wanted to say about Wagner is that he cast an enormous shadow over the 20th century, which Verdi didn't. Wagner was the huge influence on all the great modernists. Proust was utterly transfixed by him, for example. The first great work of English language modernist poetry begins with quotations and is riddled with quotations from Wagner. T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland, Vai la 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 la, is the song of the Rhine maidens, and Erden leer das Meer from Tristan, and Frisch weht der Wind der Heimat zu, mein Irisch Kind, wo weilest du? Joyce. There are books, I mean, literally dozens of books on the influence of Wagner on James Joyce. So he really transformed everything. Music was never the same after him. They say Lenny Bernstein famously called Tristan the farewell to tonality. By the time you get to the shattering end of Tristan, which I think is probably his greatest work,
I agree.
And the most emotionally and erotically charged, and the greatest love story ever told on stage. By the time you get to the end of that, it's as if a door is closed on the 19th century and something new comes, and the two new things were either pro or anti, if you like. He was as much an influence in those who detested him, like Stravinsky, who went completely the different way, with strident rhythms and different jangling discords and a whole other way of doing it, or those who were completely in his thrall, as it were, like obviously Bruckner and the second Viennese school, Berg and Schoenberg in particular, and Erich Korngold and all the others, and all film music writers, because the Leitmotif is perfect for films.
Yes.
You can have Lara's theme in Dr. Zhivago. You can have Darth Vader's theme in Star Wars. It's absolutely Wagnerian. Dun 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 dun, and so I think that's the point. Wagner was an intellectual. He was an artist. He was as much a poet as he was a composer, and a designer. An absolute monster. You wouldn't want to spend 5 minutes with him on a train.
I can fully understand that.
But Verdi was I think a more amiable man, though he could lose his temper sometimes. He lived a long and fecund life. He was connected also with the politics of his country, almost by accident, actually. There's a wonderful pun about his name that was daubed all over the walls during the time of the Garibaldi uprisings and the attempt to unite the various kingdoms of Italy under the reign of the man they hoped to be king, who would be Vittorio Emanuele. And there was a big push in the Risorgimenti, and they had the Battle of Magenta and all these things that finally they won. And those who were all for uniting Italy under King Vittorio Emanuele would write Verdi on the walls, which stood for Vittorio Emanuele, Re d'Italia. Victor Emmanuel, King of Italy. But it also stood, of course, for Verdi. And people saw in Verdi, particularly in one of his very earliest operas, Nabucco, Va Pensier, the famous chorus of the Hebrew slaves, they saw that as a cry for the freedom of Italy. And indeed, Simon Boccanegra is filled with references towards freedom and unity and a country being able to decide its own fate without being ruled by foreigners. And Italy had been ruled by the Napoleons for over 100 years and was fed up with it.
Am I right in thinking that you and Alan Davis have either just been to Simon Boccanegra? Or
we went to see an earlier production of Simon Boccanegra. I took Alan's little hand in mine and he braced like a mule. I tugged him through, and he was very, very, he was very on for it, and a very, very technical crew of academics attached all kinds of wires to us, to various parts of our bodies, as we watched the opera, to try and see at which points we were emotionally affected, and to see if they could plot different responses between the two of us, how moved we were or unmoved, whether we fell asleep, all the different things. So it was an interesting experience. It's not necessarily the opera one would have chosen first to do that
No.
to someone. I would have chosen something like Don Giovanni,
Yes.
or something which is one of my
Or The Marriage of
absolute-
Figaro,
or
maybe.
The Marriage of
Yes.
Figaro, which are
Yes.
such great introductory operas because they're funny and melodic and charged with wit.
What did Alan think of it? I mean, was he
enjoyed
bored,
it.
or
He enjoyed
did
the
enjoy
experience
it?
enormously. It's very hard not to. Under Andrea Papan, if his name right, Andrea Papan, the orchestra is in really, really great shape at the Royal Opera House. The productions have been magnificent. There's recently been a fantastic production, probably the best Verdi production I've ever seen, which is the Don Carlo, which is Nicholas Heitner directed and has been on now, I think 3 times. It will be part of the repertoire, I'm sure, for a very long time to come. And it's in a very healthy state, but it's important to the Royal Opera House because it knows that it takes up a lot of public money. It's important that it remains an opera house of immense stature in the world. So you say it in the same breath as the Paris Opera or La Scala or the Metropolitan. But it's also very important that it has, the fashionable word is outreach, that these events like the ones I'm curating, debates about whether Verdi or Wagner were greater composers, or Simon Callow's doing a marvellous talk.
Yes, I'm lucky enough. I've got tickets for that.
Have you?
I'm
That's
really
going to be
looking forward
really
to
good,
that.
I think.
Yes.
But it's important that things are screened outdoors and that people get access to them at cheap prices, and that people feel it's their opera house. In the same way as you feel it's their Houses of Parliament. Of course, Houses of Parliament cost millions to run, but you need it in a democracy, and it takes perhaps a little more argument to persuade people that it takes millions to run an opera house, but you need one in a great cultural capital. It adds to the capital, literally, of the cultural capital of our country, that we have a place like the Royal Opera House, with its different little theatres and its mixture of ballet and opera, and the very, very best of music and the very, very best of performers coming here. And some, indeed, of the very truly greatest names in all opera have made their debuts here, from Pavarotti to Joan Sutherland, and it continues. It continues on that basis, and I'm so proud to be involved with it.